So why don't we start with, talk about some of your accomplishments during the last session, especially.
Sure. I think probably the most, what most people remember or think about is the beer to go legislation that I passed, because Texas was the last state in the country that didn't allow breweries to sell beer to go. So you can go to a brew pub and take a growler home with you. You can go to other places like that and do that, but you couldn't do that at a brewery. You can go to a winery and buy a bottle of wine to go or two. You can do the same thing at distilleries around Texas, but you just couldn't do it with beer. So I was able to pass that this past session. So that was it was a lot of fun actually to do that. It was we were up against some pretty strong opposition from the beer distributor guys, or some of the beer distributor guys. So that was it was quite a challenge. And the way it passed was quite fun too. It was an amendment to a sunset bill, and it was just it was one of the more interesting ways that I've had to pass a bill in my 18 years of doing this. So that was one. I think we passed another food cottage bill. I started the Farm to Table Caucus, first bipartisan caucus in the nation, focusing on food policy. And the first bill I passed was in 2013, so we're just adding on to that legislation, the cottage food, basically allowing people to sell certain homemade products out of their home. They can sell it online. They can actually sell it online, but people would have to go to their house and maybe pick it up. I find it's a really great way for people to start their businesses, small businesses. It really does tend to benefit a lot of, mainly it's like single moms, single parents, things like that, that they just, they bake at home. They want to be able to make a little bit of money on the side. So it's just, for me, it's a kind of an entrepreneurial type of thing to do. So we passed that. I want to mention a bill that didn't pass, though. It's something that I've really been working on now for several sessions. It's the community schools bill. And I just had some serious opposition from the lieutenant governor over the past this is my third time, I think, trying to pass that bill. It got furthest, this was the furthest along it's gotten in the three tries that I had. It went to the Senate, but it just kind of died there. So briefly, community schools are basically, it's a kind of a holistic way of educating kids. Lots of times it's in a high school situation, but it can be in middle schools. Austin has several community schools. Basically, it's like wraparound services or on campus for the child, whether it's healthcare, food, breakfast, lunch, and that kind of thing. Also for parents, you can have ACC classes for parents and that kind of thing. So it kind of keeps everything centralized in the school. What my bill attempted to do was basically tell the Texas Education Agency to give them a little bit more time if they're underperforming. If they go into a community school model, they would have an additional 3 years to kind of get that going and then see if they can improve. And chances are very high that with the community school program in place, that the schools will turn around. So that one didn't quite make it. I'm probably going to reach out to the Lieutenant Governor's office pretty soon here after the election, just to see what his problem with it is exactly. I think it might be one of his policy people, but there might be some misunderstanding of what it does, I guess. So I'm going to try to clear that up, see if I can. But otherwise, I will work on that again next session.
You're one of the most senior members, I guess, of the Mexican American Caucus, is that?
I think number 15 or 16 in seniority total in the House. So I'll be one of the more senior members of the caucus, of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus.
Right.
Yeah.
What's your relationship like with the Lieutenant Governor?
Well, I mean, it's cordial with the Lieutenant Governor. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's cordial. I mean, we know each other by name, but
and the governor.
That's been, I have I respect the governor. We've had some discussions over, social media and whatnot. Most recently on the homeless encampment that's in my district, in the Montopolis. I wasn't notified about that. I wasn't told about that. My community, the Montopolis neighborhood, that community there wasn't told about it when it was announced. I'm a little bit disappointed, to say the least, about the political battles he picks on with the city of Austin, and vice versa, probably a little bit. But that's just, and most of it's done over social media, so it's not really helpful. But yeah, so I've had my disagreements with the governor on occasion.
The state keeps sending, has been for a number of years now, large numbers of troopers to the border, at great expense, obviously. Do you agree with the governor and the president that there is a security crisis down there?
Well, I'm originally from the border area. I don't know if you all knew that. I'm from McAllen, Texas originally. I was born and raised there. I came up here for college and fell in love with the city like everybody else, and I never left. I don't think that, I don't think it's good public policy, frankly. It's a lot of money. I think it was $800 million, if I'm not mistaken, the last time out. It's a show of force that I don't think is really necessary. I don't think it's helpful. I think the South Texas is pretty safe. I think the border, generally speaking, the border is fairly safe. You look at El Paso as one of the safest cities in the country. So I think it's just a lot of that is for political show. So I don't agree with that policy at all. And as as a policy chair of the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, we fought against that. We think that $800 million can do a lot of good in other places.
You were a champion of the Homestead preservation districts, sort of as a response to housing affordability, particularly in your district, which includes East Austin.
Right.
What do you think you'll do on that issue in the coming session? Do you have any plans for that, Elliot?
Well, one thing that I've tried to do, and Senator Watson as well, is there's a rule in place where you can't have two 9% tax credit deals within 2 miles of each other. Austin is unique in that we have an environment and a council that supports affordable housing pretty much across the board. And so where you need affordable housing in Austin is, I would argue, everywhere, but I think generally in the urban core is where you would really need more affordable housing. A lot of people are having to drive to work. They have to move further out, and then their jobs are still in the city. So that rule becomes a problem when you have, for example, Plaza Saltillo, there's an affordable housing, senior housing that's going to go there, but you also have the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. Chalmers Court you can see both projects just they're just like a block away from each other. So if you have that kind of situation where you want more affordable housing, 9% tax credit deals, you're restricted on where you can do it, and they'll knock each other out. Sometimes you'll have one that's like 1.9 miles away from the other, and only one of them is going to get that tax credit deal because of that rule. So that was something I'll probably work on that next time. The deal with the Homestead Preservation District is we had a population bracket on that bill initially. Well, the City of Austin's busted that bracket already. We grew, so we have to kind of next session go and change that bracket so it will more accurately reflect today's Austin, right? So that's probably what I'll try to work on affordable housing for next session, is that 2 mile deal. And I think the city, I think the bills the reason why I need to change or fix the bill for the bracket purposes is because the city, on the second iteration of the Homestead Preservation District, I allowed the city to kind of create, based on what they know on the ground, that we're going to create another Homestead Preservation District here. We give them more flexibility. And so we need to fix that so that they can do that. So right now in place is only the original Homestead Preservation District, which was my attempt to try to address gentrification, and that, roughly speaking, is I-35, MLK, the river, and probably airport area. That was the original one. So that's currently really the only one that's in place because the statute, we need to fix the statute. I mean, if there's time to work on that, I definitely will, considering redistricting and whatnot. It's coming up. I think that's going to eat up a lot of the session. But certainly will.
Didn't that get passed by the legislature and vetoed it?
That one did, yeah. The governor kindly vetoed a local bill like that, yeah.
Was that the last session? Or
that was, I think that was 2 sessions ago, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. Yeah, that was baffling to me. I mean, it was a bracket thing, and I think I'll give credit where credit is due. The governor's staff has been very accessible, and I'm able to talk to them, and we've had good conversations about the homestead preservation thing, and I think that's moving. I think whatever issues they may have had or confusion about the issue is being relieved. I mean, I can't say enough about Abbott's staff. I mean, they're really very, accessible, and they're great when it comes to policies.
Does some of that fall into the, if Austin wants it, it may not it's not good, and so it could get.
Well, you're asking me to get in the mind of the governor now, and I can't quite do that. I don't know. I think that there obviously is no love lost between Austin and the governor, or a lot of Republicans for that matter. And we can get into that if you want to. I mean, I'm open to talking about anything, but it's just not healthy. Right? I mean, it's gotten. I mean, when I first started, I was a staffer, right, in the late '90s. It was Austin bashing was well established. It was happening. It really slowed down a whole lot in the 2000s, and it seems to be picking up again. But I really think it's, and I'm going off on a tangent. I apologize for doing that, but I think that's more of a local, state versus cities, and mainly larger cities that tend to be more democratic. I mean, I don't know how else to sugarcoat it or whatever. I think that's what's going on with a lot of local, what I would call local control issues that are out there. Is the state trying to supersede progressive policies that, whether it's Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, whatever.
What is is there a role for the legislature in the Austin homeless situation across the state? And basically, do you agree with how the city has been approaching that issue?
Well, I'll answer the first question. It's a really good question. I think the state does have a role to play, and I think that really amounts to money. I mean, I think the state could put more money into mental health services and drug rehabilitation and those kind of things. I think that there is money isn't the answer to everything, but it doesn't hurt. So I think the state can come in with some more revenue for those exact purposes. I think that would be great. I think what is happening in Montopolis, though, isn't really helpful. I think the last count, and again to the governor's credit and others, I'm getting a pretty regular, at least once a week kind of count of who's out there. I think there were, and I hate to say, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 90 some odd. It's under 100, but it's in the 90s that are there right now. Next week it could be 80, it could be 110, I mean, you just don't know. I don't think that's the state's, I don't think that's an effective way to do it, because if that's the case, I mean, I've been to San Antonio, I've been to Dallas, Houston, there's homelessness over there too. So if the state's going to be doing that here in Austin, I understand this is the capital city, and the legislature is here, but there's probably state property in Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio that they could be putting, doing kind of the same thing, but they chose not to do that. I just think that that homelessness really is a very localized issue, and how cities deal with it should be done locally. And the state coming in with resources to help cities do that, I think, would be more appropriate. And the second question is the one that you're trying to get me in trouble with the local. Do I agree with what the city have done? Well, I don't know all the ins and outs of how they came to that decision. I think I will applaud the city for trying to address that issue. I don't know if undoing the camping ban, how integral that was to maybe solve or trying to address that issue. And obviously, I have to speak up on it at times because a lot of this is occurring in my district. I mean, I do represent Central East Austin. I live just east of I-35. I mean, it was night and day once that ordinance passed, and so it's very, whether or not there's more homeless people in Austin, I don't know. I know that I've heard numbers thrown around like 2,300, 2,400, something like that, 2,600. But it certainly is more visible than it was, and so. I do hear a lot from constituents about that.
It just seemed, you got to applaud anybody who's trying to help, but it did seem like it just kind of threw gasoline on the fire. There wasn't a plan around it. I mean,
wasn't really a plan around it.
The most disturbing is we're just going to do it, see what happens,
right.
versus having a plan around it.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to sit here and criticize my colleagues in the city council. I do. Again, they wanted to address that issue, and I do applaud them for that. I know they've hired somebody. They hired a person, right, to be the homeless czar, homeless person to address that. And most recently, they went on ahead and hired somebody as a consultant on that issue. So I'm really confused by why that is.
I think it's the same
but
person. I don't
is it? It's not the same person. Is it?
Yeah, the first person
left.
I mean, she was here for what, 3 months? A month?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that might be an
Yeah.
exaggeration.
It was pretty quick.
It wasn't long.
Yeah. I mean, there's some issues, and if, I'll tell my constituents, anybody who asks me that there's some issues that just don't have an answer, like a clear-cut answer, and it's multi-layered, and I think the homelessness really is one of those issues. Community First is a great example of how you can do this right. And for those of you who may not have been out there before, take a tour of it. I mean,
Is that your district?
It's just out of my district. I believe it's in Cheryl Cole's district. But man, they're doing it right over there. And I'm not suggesting that all the homeless move out there. I think that's not necessarily realistic. But I think that you have in existence a model that is shown to work, and that maybe we can replicate at some level. That as a city policy.
Have you been approached more on that Metropolis? Is that property of them doing anything more formal there, or doing anything else with it, or?
Oh, have I been approached by the governor's office or something? Oh, no, not at all. Not on that. I have to say there's been a lot more radio silence on that particular issue with the governor's office than some other issues that I deal with them with. I was pretty vocal about it at the time. I don't know, my constituents there was a little bit of initially some concern. We were going to do a little town hall thing, and that just didn't happen, didn't work out. There was some miscommunication on location and time and all that kind of stuff, so we might still do that. I think that we're getting a lot fewer calls from that neighborhood right around that area, but I don't know. I've talked a little bit to the chamber about their idea, downtown Austin, with the downtown Austin Alliance. I don't see that there's a clear plan there either, frankly. And
well, there didn't seem to be beds for anyone to go up front. It seems
right.
like the funnel is there's no funnel to try to
right.
help people. So.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that issue, and if you'd like, it's really not a safe situation for anybody. I mean, even for the homeless, you'll see violence happening, around the arch, for example. I mean, there's an ambulance there every day. I drive. That's my way home from the Capitol or from downtown, is going on East 7th Street, and there's constantly something going on there. So we have to address that issue in a really holistic kind of way, and with the understanding, I think the public needs to understand that it'll never be solved 100%, but we can try to mitigate it as much as possible. I hope that answers your question.
You mentioned the craft beer vertigo legislation. Are you going to rest on your laurels as the growler king, or do you have other Texas liquor regulations in mind?
I'm a man of my word. I said we're not touching at least the beer stuff for a long time. Okay. Right? So I'm not doing anything with that. That was the trick, not the trick. That was part of the deal. Once it was clear, once my amendment got on the House side, the votes were there in the Senate. It was clear. But that was the hurdle was the House. My bill never got a hearing. That was my only window of opportunity. We did have the wholesale beer distributors were against the bill, but we had the Beer Alliance who were with us, and that's another set of distributors, and that was part of the agreement that we signed with them. So I don't know if someone else might do something, but I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm not going to do it. I think I don't even know what other issues would be out there really on that, because I mean you can buy I want to grow that, and I mean I see that as a small businesses too. Like you look at Still Whiskey is in my district on St. Elmo and South Congress area. It's I think the first distillery in Austin since before Prohibition. It's a small burgeoning business. You can say the same thing about almost every distillery or winery in Texas, right? They're small businesses except for Tito's, right? And so whatever I can do to help them out, I mean I'm happy to do that. It's right now I think everyone seems to be in a good place. That's from what I'm hearing anyway. So I probably won't do anything.
What are the things you hear most about around your district? What's everybody worried about?
By far, it's property taxes and the cost of Austin and the change of how it's changing. I mean, where I live, just east of downtown, that the change is pretty much complete. I mean, I'm literally 5 blocks from I-35. It's almost complete. To say the gentrification is coming is it's been there, done that, it's done. But it's really fast moving further and further east and southeast, and so I'm hearing that from a lot of my constituents, even in Dove Springs, that are complaining about their property taxes because wages aren't going up, and we can We can talk about under 3% unemployment in Austin, but what are the wages like? We still are a city that has a lot of state employees, a lot of government employees, University of Texas employees, where probably the wages are pretty stagnant. We used to have a lot of state employees living off of South Congress, right, in Travis Heights. Unless they still own it, they're. It's just that's what I hear more than anything else.
So have you seen forecasts or something about those springs? That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people, yeah.
And similar affordable housing thing.
No, well, you asked about a forecast. I know that my southeast quadrant of my district is growing pretty fast in terms of rooftops and people like brand new houses, and also the prices are also going up. But I don't remember exact numbers, but I know that there are several brand new developments that are coming up, thousands of acres kind of things that are coming up online. So that might be our next wave of affordable, our starter homes. Let's just say it that way, because I don't know what.
Yeah, I was wondering if there were projections of tear downs and that kind of stuff happening.
You know what? I don't know. I probably know somebody who could answer that question.
A lot of houses in the 80s, I would guess.
In Dove Springs, yeah. Well, centrally east, like right just east of downtown, a lot of those houses are being torn down once they're being purchased, unless they have some kind of historic designation, which there are some. But a lot, you can't really even buy a vacant, which there aren't very many vacant lots in that neighborhood, but for under $350,000. If you're lucky, it's just the way that goes. So affordability is a huge issue.
So what's the legislature do? Your Republican colleagues came up with a plan last time that the cities did not care for.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, the bottom line on that whole thing, and I had a town hall during session to talk about House Bill 2, and I was on Ways and Means, so I heard that bill, House Bill 2 and Senate Bill 2, is the bulk of your property taxes is not City of Austin or ACC or the hospital district. It is your AISD taxes, right? The property tax, that's the bulk of it. That's like 60+% of it is that. So the more that the state contributes to public education directly to the districts or directly to our public schools, then ideally that would lower that portion of the property taxes. Barring having an entire new tax to replace that, or at least cut into that, I don't know how else. It is on the shoulders of the legislature. There's no doubt, and I won't pass that along to the city or the county, because that's not where the property taxes. That's not where the bulk of the taxes are coming from. They're coming from the schools. And if I'm not about to sit here and say that the schools should get less money, because that's not the case. We need to be giving as much as we can.
A couple of House candidates on the Republican side here who fought for some kind of reforms in the appraisal system itself, like the chief appraiser should be elected.
Oh, that's a terrible idea. Yeah, that's a terrible idea. Yeah.
Or some kind of dollar limits on.
See, but that's all just nibbling around the edges. It doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is the fact that the state of Texas has, for the last 20 years, has put less money into public education, right? What they did, what Senate Bill 2 ended up doing, which is capping, the revenue cap. That doesn't. My constituents aren't going to see any tax benefit to that. If they see any tax benefit, it's because of the much more money that we gave this past session for public education, which isn't sustained, by the way. We're going to have to deal with that next session and how we continue doing, providing that much revenue for our public education. That was the fatal flaw of that bill. The only thing, I think it's a great bill. We put more money into public education. I think it's great, more money for teachers. But unless we were going to sustain that, if we had a mechanism there so we know how to sustain that long term, it's going to be a very short couple years that you'll see it. That's about it.
What should be done with the rainy day fund?
We should spend it on certain things that we think are important. It's not this untouchable thing. It shouldn't be anyway. I think when we're going to come to a shortfall at some point soon. The forecast for Texas, the economic forecast is pretty solid, I think, for the next couple of years. But sooner or later, we're going to have a bump in the road, and so that's the rainy day fund.
Is there education, or is there some kind of priorities you would have for that?
I think education would be probably right up there, frankly.
What can the state legislature do to kind of improve the children's uninsured health care kids issue around that?
Yeah. Well, we can expand Medicaid. I guess that would help. Yeah, we're one of the states that don't want to do that for whatever reason. That would be something that I definitely would push for. I know that my colleague John Busey has been pushing for that pretty heavily too. A lot of Democrats have too, but that would be one thing we could do. Yeah. I mean, the rainy day fund just kind of keeps. I mean, it keeps growing, right? If you don't spend it, it just keeps growing. But you have to kind of also look at it. Do you want to spend one big fat check one time, or do you want to try to figure out a long-term solution for some of these issues that will cost a lot of money over time? But if they say, we're going to put a certain percentage of that rainy day fund is going to go for children's health insurance, for example, or something like that, or public education, we're going to say 25% of that every 2 years is going to go for that, for reducing property taxes or whatever it might be that we decide that we want to do with it. But the Republican-led legislature has been very leery about touching that fund, even when we really have some big needs. So,
even take a percentage of growth could be.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my State Affairs Committee, we were meeting yesterday, and a lot of the hearing was about electric vehicles and battery storage and how things are just going that direction. And we look at how we fund even public education. 5 cents per gallon it's a gas tax, right? Goes to public education, right? And more, gasoline is not a reliable way for revenue for the state, because cars are getting more and more efficient. If you look at, we're going to be all driving electric cars, at some point in the next 10, 15, 20 years. Now what? So it's challenging to look at. I mean, Texas's future is bright, no doubt, but I think that it doesn't take a genius to see that there are some things that we should be looking at right now to address going into the future. We're going to have maybe some issues with our revenue. I mean, we're one of the few states that don't have an income tax, so you have to have you have property and sales, and Republicans were trying to raise the sales tax last time. Well, it really wasn't that close. It ended up not even being voted on, but it was something that was being discussed.
We've heard about the Republican candidates in here.
Well, they did.
Raise consumption tax, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but that was an interesting debate too, because we didn't actually have the debate because the bill never came up or amendment never came up. But yeah, Republicans were like, "But I don't want to raise taxes." Like they didn't know how to handle that. It is a regressive tax, and virtually every Democrat was against it, and you had enough Republicans like, yeah, but my constituents had to pay sales tax too, right? So they didn't want to do that either. But that was an interesting time, just kind of sitting back and watching the Republicans debate themselves on that particular issue. But anyway.
I'm going to talk about the speaker's race, if we can shift for a second. I mean, there's going to be new leadership in the chamber no matter what. I want to hear your perspective, kind of best and worst case scenario in terms of how Democrats do in November.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you guys are in the position of selecting the speaker, maybe not. What's your thoughts there? What direction could we go?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm seriously trying not to think about that at all these days, because it's just such a guessing game. There's two scenarios. The Democrats take the House as a scenario, and how likely that is, or unlikely that is we can talk about that when there's not a camera in front of me. But we can. I don't know. I mean, I think there's definitely an opportunity there for Democrats to take over. That's a totally different scenario than if it's I believe Democrats are going to pick up seats regardless, whether we get the majority or not. We're going to pick up seats. We're 9 away right now. If we get to where we're only 3 away or 4 away, I mean, that is, now you're talking about virtually 50-50. We would have an opportunity there to try to pick, a more moderate speaker. But that being said, redistricting is a huge issue. That's going to, be everything. A big part of the budget, and redistricting is going to take up virtually all of the session. So regardless of who the Republican is, Democrats, I know that I would go in there knowing that they're going to try to protect the Republican majority as much as they can. So with that understanding, it's just a matter of, okay, well, I'd like to see, if the Republicans are still in control, I would like to see a Republican who is more open-minded, more moderate on issues, and is going to commit would commit to, certainly to me and to the Democratic caucus, not to play around with really crazy social conservative, red meat kind of stuff. Let's just stick to business. So that's it. Knowing that we're probably going to be at serious odds when it comes to redistricting, because that's the game. I mean, that's their that's 10 more years of potentially of control. And so I'm not answering your question 100%. I guess I think if it's a Republican, I think, and we're closer, then we have an opportunity, a really good opportunity to pick a speaker, or be in a position to pick with Republicans, of course, pick a speaker that hopefully is a bit more moderate. And if it's a Democrat, if Democrats are in control of the House, I don't even want to think about that the scenario and who might be speaker on that one, because it's just, I don't know who would be interested in doing it.
Republicans might pick the speaker then.
Well, that's the thing. That's why it's so. I mean, I was talking to some people about this yesterday. That's the thing. If say Democrats say we take the House, but we only take the House by 2 or 3 votes, well, it's quite easy then for a chunk of Republicans to pick who they want, and then that Democrat would just need to pick 20 of his or her friends, right? And then that's who picks it. It can go either way. That's the thing. I mean, it just depends on who would really want to do it. I think in the Democratic side, I don't know if no one's really announced or anything like that. I think that would be foolish. But there are probably a handful of people that would kind of spring to the top. But on the Republican side, I don't know. There's a lot because of the Speaker Bonin issue. There's still a lot of hurt feelings from the folks I've talked to, so I can't even guess who might make the top there. So I don't know if that answered your question. I tried to, but
I don't know if redistricting comes under state affairs or not.
no, it goes through its own redistricting committee.
So state affairs does not have. What I'm going to ask about is there any hope for more transparency in that process?
The redistricting.
Memorial Day weekend. Here's the plan. That's this kind of thing. More special sessions.
Right. I think it'll look just like the last redistricting, really. I mean, a lot of stuff is done behind the scenes, and usually the members talk to each other. I mean, if it's particularly, that's the other thing, if Democrats, even if we don't have control, but if we're really, really close, it's going to be really hard to just totally screw over all that, because it can kind of can cut both ways. It just depends, But for the most part, the way it generally works is the Travis County delegation will get together, we'll look at our maps, and we'll, for the House side anyway, we'll look at our district lines and the population now. Austin's over 1 million now. I guess Travis County is definitely over 1 million. You might have to go out of the county line at some point. I mean, we're all contained right now in Travis County because of the population 10 years ago. I mean, I think the rule is once you hit a certain population, you can go outside county lines or whatever. So who knows how that'll look, but we'll generally agree as a delegation. Then we'll go to the chair of the redistricting committee and say we've agreed on this. That's what we'd like to see. We kind of do the same thing with congressional, and for the most part, the House lines are going to be. They'll respect what the local people decide on, for the most part.
For the state house.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, there's some districts now. If you look at some of the districts around Houston and the suburbs of Dallas area that are definitely purple now, those districts you'll probably see Republicans trying to gerrymander a little bit so that they're picking up as many Republicans as possible, so that could be a safe Republican seat for a little bit longer. But that's all kind of changing. I think it's interesting how the affordability question is really translated into at the House picking up 12 seats in a way. I mean, if you told me 5 years ago that Williamson County would not have a Republican state representative in it, I would not believe that. But and same thing with Hayes County, right? But what's happening, right? Austin is bringing people can't afford to live here anymore, so they're moving out to these communities, these areas, and they're becoming more democratic because they're bringing their progressive values out with them, and the net effect is really the suburbs becoming more in play than they've ever been in the past, whereas the rural area is getting more and more solidly Republican.
You're on the committee that's going to look into the Secretary of State's handling of the voter rolls. Many people saw that as, an attempt to suppress voting.
Absolutely.
What do you hope to accomplish on that committee? What could come out of it?
Which committee are you speaking of?
I thought there was a committee that's going to look into.
Oh, well, within the Mexican American Legislative
Yeah.
Caucus, or okay, I'm just trying to. Well, we just we're always on guard. I mean, the last 10 to 20 years have been, from my perspective, a lot of voter suppression legislation that has passed the House and the Senate and gone on to become law. So we have to just keep an eye on that, make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, looking at other states, a very similar kind of efforts were made in other states, just like they were trying to do here. And it's an obvious attempt. And really, the net effect of that particular, the way they were, this particular time, the way that was going on, would really impact more than anybody else is new citizens, right? People that were here, they were here legally, they had a driver's license, right? And then they since became citizens, and those people would on the rolls, and then they register to vote. It looks like on the DPS side, for example, that might look like these are legal residents, driver's licenses, and then now they're citizens, and they haven't necessarily gone to go through all of the processes in between between becoming a citizen and registering to vote and all that stuff. So the net effect would have been really to disenfranchise a lot of mainly Latino voters and new citizen voters. So we just have to keep a pretty close eye on that for next, not just during session, but there's a lot of stuff that can happen during interim too. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. I mean, I think as Mexican American Legislative Caucus, we start out assuming that there's going to be some disenfranchisement going on. So that's kind of where we start. And so we just kind of look at it and just follow as much follow through as we can.
I know we're nearing the end of our time, but I want to ask about one bill that you filed that seems to be a bipartisan effort and seems to be something that every session people are like, this is the session, is the tampon tax elimination bill. How are you feeling about prospects on that going forward?
Oh, well, I think the more Democrats get elected, the more likely that can happen. There's a lot of things that have changed over, and I'm going to digress just a little bit. From when I first got in 2003, it was the first Republican majority since Reconstruction, right, in the House. And I have seen, we're really close. I think in 2008, to the 9th session, we were one vote away from a majority. That was probably the best session that I've ever experienced because you really had parity, and it was, you didn't have, if it was crazy right-wing stuff, it didn't get out of committee. It didn't, if it was, crazy left-wing stuff, it did the same thing. So it was kind of just more right down the middle. And then we'd have terrible years. We have 100+ Republicans to 40-something Democrats. But what I've noticed, though, over the time is there's certain issues that have really come up that there's more bipartisan support for. I think criminal justice reform is one of those, as an example of that. And I'm getting to answer that's to answer your point, is I think that kind of thing would fall. I just think marijuana is one, too, that there's, bipartisan support for at least decriminalization of some level of marijuana. And that was unheard of in 2003. I mean, never would have even thought that was going to be the case. So I think there's certain tax kind of issues like that I think are starting to fall into this, like, yeah, that just makes sense. Let's just go ahead and do that. So I guess I would say that the likelihood of that is better than it was last session, probably. Yeah, the way the House has evolved over the last almost 20 years since I've been in there is pretty interesting to see.